Hey everyone, TJ here. Uh, Matt came up with an idea that I share with you guys some of my favorite war and military themed movies, and I thought that was a pretty good idea. One little problem I ran into is I had too many of them. So this is actually one of two parts. The first one's going to be my more favorite ones. The second part will be the ones I'll call honorable mention. Those that may not necessarily be my most favorite, but I've still seen them a few times also. Any ex-military guy will tell you it's difficult for them to sit through a movie and say, "Oh, he didn't shoot that weapon right. He didn't handle it right. He didn't talk right over the radio." One of my pet peeves is the haircuts. I'll watch a movie and I'll see their haircuts, and right away I'll launch into the "we could never wear our hair that long" rant. So without any further rambling, let's get going, and hope you enjoy it. If I missed one, or if you think one's better than the other, then by all means comment below.
So let's start off with Saving Private Ryan. It's a story about a Ranger squad that would go behind enemy lines and look for an airborne soldier whose other three brothers had died in combat. Their mission to bring him home so that the soldier's family would have at least one surviving son after the end of World War II. World War II vets would report that the D-Day Normandy opening scene was brutally realistic. The movie would star Tom Sizemore and Tom Hanks. Later in the movie, we would see Matt Damon. This movie would introduce us to new movie stars such as Vin Diesel, Edward Burns, Barry Pepper, Giovanni Ribisi, and Adam Goldberg. We would also see a cameo by Paul Giamatti. And I was compelled to add this guy. We will see and hear much more about him in other movies, and he was very integral in being a technical advisor to a lot of my favorite movies. And he would be given cameo parts, and he's a retired Marine Major, and you'll hear more about him later. And here we have the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers. It's a true story about Easy Company, 101st Airborne. It was one of the most decorated units in World War II. It's got a lengthy cast. I don't even want to try and list them all, but here we have a picture of the main characters that you'll see throughout the series. We would be introduced to the primary character, Damian Lewis, and another one of the main characters, Ron Livingston from Office Space. Peter Schwimmer had a bit of a role in it, and even Tom Hanks' son, Colin Hanks, had a cameo. Here we have Dale Dye. I told you you'd see him again. And very interesting. He was the technical advisor in the production of this series. And in the beginning, when they were putting the guys through the boot camp, if you see the documentary of the making of Band of Brothers, this guy admonished the staff that they do their best in depicting their characters. It was quite a motivational scene from that documentary. Here we have Black Hawk Down. It's a story based on a mission that comprised of a task force of Army Rangers and Delta Force operators, and it begins with their mission of capturing some high-ranking Somali warlord officials, and in the process of their raid, 2 Black Hawks are shot down, and it turns into a very chaotic rescue mission. And if you've seen Larry King Live, the actual Michael Durant, the one chopper pilot who was captured, his version of his capture is it's different than what's depicted in the movie. I would say the movie got more right than wrong, so ultimately I got to give it a thumbs up. It would star Josh Hartnett, Tom Sizemore, and William Fichtner. I'm sure you've seen him before. Eric Bana. And for those who enjoyed the Game of Thrones series, Nicolas Coster-Waldau. And I sure hope I got his name pronounced correctly. I'll tell you what, until I looked at the list of cast, I had no idea he was in this movie. And for those who may or may not be unaware, he played the character Jaime Lannister in the HBO series, the famous Game of Thrones. And here we have another HBO miniseries, Generation Kill. And this is a very interesting one, I always thought. It's about the Marines of the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, and it was written by a reporter by the name of Evan Wright. He was a Rolling Stone reporter embedded with these Marines, and very interestingly, he would ride in these Humvees along with these Marines and subject himself to the same hazards that the Marines themselves would find themselves in. Initially, the Marines didn't take to him too warmly, but when they saw how he was so willing to go with them, even on the dangerous missions, they warmed to him and accepted him as one of their own. The writer, like I said, was Evan Wright, and he would be portrayed in the movie by the star Lee Tergesen. Here we have Alexander Skarsgård. He plays a squad leader, and John Huertas. James Ransone. Stark Sands. And a very interesting character here, Rudy Reyes. Actual Marine, plays himself. They did this, and I don't know if he was the only one to do it, but he's the one that's most known. And they did it in an effort to maintain authenticity, and he would give insight as to actual events during the production of this miniseries. Here we have the Pacific, and something that I failed to mention earlier, but the Pacific was produced by Tom Hanks along with Band of Brothers. And what happened was, or what the story is upon Tom Hanks starring in the movie Saving Private Ryan, he was so impressed with the making of that movie, he was compelled to follow that up with the miniseries Band of Brothers and the Pacific. The Pacific centers on the 1st, 5th, and 7th regiments of the 1st Marine Division from the beginning of World War II through the end, and it depicts events in the Pacific Theater as they unfold. The series would center around 3 characters by the name of Eugene Sledge, played by Joseph Mazzello, Robert Leckie, the writer of A Helmet for My Pillow. He was played by James Badge Dale, and John Basilone, the winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor, played by John Setta. Here we have the movie Platoon, and I always found this very interesting. I saw this movie in December of 1986. 6 months prior, I had just gone to Panama for jungle school, and I couldn't help but notice that some of the finer details they got right. And I was just impressed with the attention to detail in that regard. There's also a story that the cast of this movie, they were put through the ringers for about 2 or 3 weeks, so much so that the poor babies wanted to quit. But nevertheless, they followed through, and the movie was made, and here we have The Platoon. In it starred Charlie Sheen, William Dafoe, Tom Berenger, along with Forrest Whitaker. And here we have Dale Dye, the Marine again, and I'm sure he was the guy who most likely put the poor cast through the ringers since he did serve as a technical advisor to the production of this movie, and I'm sure he's the guy that they were complaining about. Here we have the movie 13 Hours, and it depicts the event that occurred September 11th, 2012, in which the U.S. consulate in Benghazi and a CIA covert installation would be attacked. In this attack, Ambassador Chris Stevens would die along with communications specialist Sean Smith, who unfortunately was only there temporarily. Later in the evening, Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty would die in a mortar attack in defense of the CIA installation. Here in this picture, we have Pablo Schreiber playing Tonto, John Krasinski as Jack Silva, David Denman as Boone, and Dominic Famusa as Tig. Here we have James Badge Dale, the same actor from the HBO series Pacific. He plays Tyrone Woods, one of the Navy SEALs who would die later in the night during the attack. Here we have David Costabile, he plays the infamous CIA chief who gives the disputed stand down command, which, by the way, Tonto swears up and down was given. Here we have Chris Paronto, codenamed Tonto, and I wanted to really talk about this guy here. Some years later, actually kind of when the movie came out, he would go on speaking engagements and do interviews, and he really made it known his disgust. First, over the fact that no effort was made for them to be rescued, and then when it was all said and done, no effort was made to retrieve them from Libya. And if you recall in the movie, the CIA people are getting on a jet, and it was a privately owned jet that they had to pay an oil millionaire to use to get out of the country. And then the final scene got the four of them out on the tarmac, and a Libyan C-130 pulls up, at which point Tonto says, "Look, the United States still isn't here to get us out of the country." And when Tonto would go on interviews and whatnot, he would just say over and over again how disgusted he was that they wouldn't even come and get them out of the country. And I always remember that whenever I saw his interviews. Here we have the movie American Sniper, a story about a man by the name of Chris Kyle, regarded as the most lethal sniper in United States history. He was a Navy SEAL, did multiple tours in Iraq. He was such an effective sniper that the Taliban had a bounty out on him up to $80,000. Here we have Bradley Cooper playing Chris Kyle. Here is an actual picture of Chris Kyle. And here is the piece of excrement who shot him in the back when they were at a gun range. Here we have the movie 12 Strong, in which Special Forces units were inserted into Afghanistan just a few weeks after the attack on the World Trade Center on 9/11/2001. These Special Force guys ultimately became known as the legendary Horse Soldiers. Here we have Chris Hemsworth, and for those who might be curious, he played Thor in the Marvel movie. He plays the character Captain Mitch Nelson. Here we have Michael Shannon, and unfortunately he is known for anti-gun comments. In this movie, he plays the character Hal Spencer. We have Michael Pena playing the character Sam Pillar. And comedian Rob Riggle plays a bit part as an Army officer. Here we have Chris Hemsworth with Naveed Nigabahan, and I'm sorry for butchering that last name, but he plays General Dostum. Actual Special Forces soldiers would comment in interviews that they felt General Dostum was accurately depicted in this movie. There you have it. There will be a part 2 because I have to apologize, but one movie came to mind as I was working on part 1 here. So, part 2, I will fix my mistake and talk about some more of my favorite war movies. And as we like to say here at the Michigan Conservative Roundtable, be safe, watch your six, and don't tread on me.